I don't think the honesty is what the newspapers and magazines make it out to be, what the articles make it out to be.
He was among the most promising young actors in Hollywood. A daring performer who defied categorization, a heartthrob, and 2 Oscar nominations before the age of 20. He was at last making a resurgence by the middle of the 1970s. Then it was all over in one illogical moment. Furthermore, they did not want to believe the reality about what actually occurred that night. Sal Mineo's narrative has no satisfactory conclusion and reads like a script. A Bronx teenager who became extremely famous only to become stuck in a company that was never welcoming to outsiders. Not simply his death was reported in the headlines when he passed away in 1976. They conjectured. They engaged in gossip. They fed a population that preferred gossip to truth by twisting his last moments into something vile. And the true explanation remained obscured by rumors for decades. Here's the problem, though. Eventually, the truth was revealed, and it was more straightforward and tragic than any conspiracy theory could have predicted. We will follow Sal Mineo's trip from beginning to end in this video. The quick ascent, the agonizing descent, and the return that was robbed of him. We'll go over the specifics of what transpired the night he was murdered, how the years-long inquiry went, and what the evidence actually revealed when the case was ultimately resolved. The mystery was never the type of story Hollywood likes to convey, as you realize once you know the details. That was far from the case. We'll begin with the adolescent kid who had the option of taking a completely other route. The directors and performers who recognized his gift before he even knew how to manage it will be introduced to us. We'll discover how easily celebrity can put someone in a box, how difficult it is to get out of it, and why Sal was prepared to jeopardize his career in order to play the parts he felt were right. After that, we'll enter the West Hollywood alley where everything came to an end and piece together what transpired second by second. You will understand exactly how the Sal Mineo case was resolved at the end of this chapter, as well as why so many individuals found it difficult to accept the conclusion. This is neither a story about a shady underworld hit or a flashy Hollywood dispute. It is about a life full of possibilities that are crushed by something much more arbitrary, which makes it more difficult to accept. And after hearing it, you may find yourself reflecting on how easily anyone's circumstances can change. On January 10, 1939, Salvatore Mineo Jr. was born in the Bronx, New York. His parents, who were immigrants from Sicily, owned a small company that made coffins. Sal was restless, irritable, and already in trouble, and the Bronx was a difficult place for a child to grow up in those days. He served time in juvenile jail after being arrested for robbery when he was 12. An instructor recognized something in him, but it might have been the beginning of an irreversible slip. She encouraged him to take acting classes after noticing how he brightened a room, even for the wrong reasons. Everything changed with that little prod. Sal made his Broadway debut in Tennessee Williams' The Rose Tattoo when he was 13 years old. Although it was a little role, it demonstrated that he could fit in somewhere larger. One part led to another, and by his mid-50s, he was trying out for movie roles. Then Rebel Without a Cause, the break that made him famous, came. Sal played the lonely, depressed kid who connects with James Dean's character, John Plato Crawford, in 1955 when he was just 16 years old. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, becoming one of Hollywood's youngest contenders ever for his unvarnished, vulnerable, and unforgettable performance. He became famous all of a sudden. Sal didn't want to become simply another teen star, but the studios wanted to take advantage of his delicate, soulful image. Before turning 22, he received his second Oscar nomination for his performance as a Jewish refugee in the 1960 film Exodus. The ceiling appeared to be non-existent. He had the reputation, skill, and good looks of someone who worked with the biggest names in Hollywood. He was aware of the industry's potential for rapid change, though. But for the time being, the possibilities were endless. He was establishing a career that most actors would kill for, earning money, and meeting legendary people. Trouble was on the way, and it would arrive sooner than he thought. Sal Mineo had a great start to the 1960s, but Hollywood was changing, and not in his favor. He had a few good roles after Exodus, but Hollywood continued to view him as the sensitive outsider. Casting directors found it difficult to see him as anything other than an adolescent heartthrob by the time he was in his 20s. Additionally, he did not meet the requirements for a leading man in Hollywood. In a field that is fixated on all-American looks, this Sicilian American is shorter than others, not afraid to take chances in parts that unnerved producers. Even if they were not publicly confirmed, rumors regarding his sexual orientation simply served to increase hesitancy during a time when Hollywood was still quite conservative. Big film offers had dried up by the middle of the 1960s. He switched to television, making appearances on programs like Combat and The Patty Duke Show, but the income and status were far less than what he was used to. Sal, who was determined not to fade away, turned to stage employment, appearing in pieces such as Fortune and Men's Eyes and The Rose Tattoo, the latter of which bravely tackled homosexuality in jail. Additionally, he started directing, with P.S. In the dark comedy Your Cat is Dead, a failing actor kidnaps a burglar. Sal dedicated years to the project because he saw it as a means of regaining his fame and as art. There were indications of a resurgence by the early 1970s. He had promising directing prospects and was cast in a new television series. His friends observed that he appeared more upbeat. He had been frustrated by his job for years, but now he was finally finding exciting work. Additionally, by early 1976, when P.S. Sal appeared to be in his best form in years, confident, active, and focused on the future, in Your Cat is Dead in Los Angeles. He had no idea that those would be his final rehearsals. Sal Mineo was expected to have a typical evening on February 12, 1976. He had practiced P.S. that night at the Westwood Playhouse. Your feline companion has passed away. With the same fervor that had propelled his early career, he was giving the production his all while it was in full swing. He was reportedly having a great time, making jokes with his co-stars, rehearsing sequences, and discussing next projects. At approximately 9:30 that evening, Sal climbed into his compact, pale Datsun and drove back to his West Hollywood apartment. He resided on Holloway Drive, a thoroughfare dotted with palm trees, low-rise structures, and secret passageways. Despite its vibrancy, the area took on a gloomy aspect after sunset. Street violence, burglaries, and small-time thievery were commonplace. He parked behind his building in the alley. The kind of cramped room whose brick walls are framed by lengthy, distorted shadows cast by headlights. A short, sharp noise was afterward heard by neighbors. It's the kind of sound that makes you pause and question whether you heard anything at all, rather than a protracted fight. Someone approached Sal from behind and stabbed him in the chest in the alley, only a few feet from his door. His heart was stabbed by the blade. There was no time to contact for assistance because everything transpired so quickly. No opportunity to defend yourself. Sal was hurt and stumbled toward his building's rear entrance, leaving a bloody trail behind him. Neighbors quickly discovered him as he slumped close to the stairs. To call for an ambulance, someone ran. Others spoke with him and pleaded with him to stay aware. However, the damage was disastrous. Sal Mineo was declared dead by the time paramedics arrived, despite their prompt arrival. His age was 37. It initially appeared to be a potential robbery. The attack had every indication of street violence, and the neighborhood was notorious for muggings. Brutal, abrupt, and finished in a matter of seconds. His wallet, however, was still there when the detectives examined his body. His watch and keys were undamaged. That one piece of information left the case open to conjecture. What was the motivation if nothing was taken? The media covered it extensively in a matter of hours. The former Hollywood Golden Boy's horrific demise made headlines. Some articles took the most dramatic tack, implying clandestine feuds or risky relationships. Some subtly implied that the attack might have been a hate crime. Though there were plenty of theories, none of them had any conclusive evidence. Friends were devastated. The notion that Sal had been killed in a random mugging was categorically denied by many of them. They maintained that he was cautious, that he was familiar with his neighborhood, and that he was not the kind to venture into dangerous situations. However, the investigation was already hindered by the lack of witnesses who could identify the attacker. A potential return that evening was cut short in a matter of seconds, leaving a trail of unresolved issues in its wake. The police were faced with a murder case, but there was no obvious reason, no clear suspect, and a public that was eager for answers that had not yet been found. The Sal Mineo case was in the news from the beginning. However, that didn't make it any simpler to solve. Investigators surveyed the alley, spoke with nearby residents, and collected the few evidence they could find. No weapon, no fingerprints, and no reliable eyewitness. A man in black clothing, possibly of African American descent, was spotted sprinting from the alley by a few locals. However, nobody could see well enough to create a composite sketch in the dark. Police were left with theories because they had little to work with. That void was promptly filled by the media. Sal was allegedly the target of an ex-lover, according to several newspapers. Some indicated a botched narcotics deal. Although there was no proof for any of it, the rumors proliferated more quickly than official declarations. Speculation about his sexual orientation dominated coverage, turning his private life into tabloid fodder. Friends were concerned that this emphasis was detracting from the hunt for the murderer. Despite being vibrant, West Hollywood in the 1970s had a reputation for small crime after dark. That made it simple to promote a bungled robbery narrative to the general public, but many people close to Sal disapproved of it. For a terrified robber, the single direct stab wound felt too accurate. Leads dried up during the next few weeks. Rumors of a confession or a suspect would occasionally surface, but nothing remained. Detectives continued to follow up on earlier leads, but progress was excruciatingly slow in the absence of proof. Many people believed the case would go unsolved by the late 1970s. Friends believed that the injustice was nearly as devastating as losing him, while fans held to their own theories. Nobody anticipated that a name would eventually come to light in a completely unrelated investigation years later, breaking the case. The Sal Mineo case languished in the Los Angeles Police Department's cold files for almost 3 years. When tips poured in, detectives looked them over, but nothing stuck until 1979, when a name appeared on their desks from a completely other investigation. Williams, Lionel Ray. Williams, a 21-year-old Los Angeles resident, had recently been found guilty of armed robbery. Before a fellow prisoner informed investigators that Williams had been bragging about stabbing a man in West Hollywood a few years prior, no one was considering him for the Mineo murder. The description was virtually exactly the same as Sal's case. An alley, a single victim, and a fatal chest wound. Detectives made the decision to look further. They discovered that Williams had been skulking around the West Hollywood neighborhood on the evening of February 12, 1976, reportedly in search of a victim to rob. In addition to fitting the hazy description provided by witnesses, he had a habit of carrying blades when committing crimes. At first, Williams denied everything when questioned. As the interviews progressed, however, he acknowledged that he had stabbed a man in an alley close to Holloway Drive, but he maintained that he was unaware that the victim was famous. He described it as an unsuccessful robbery attempt. He said that when the man protested, he became frightened, slashed out with the knife, and fled. Some of his story raised doubts in the minds of the police. Sal's heart had been struck by a single, clean thrust rather than the haphazard damage you might anticipate from a thrashing robber. However, in the absence of tangible proof, they had to concentrate on what they could demonstrate. That Williams had confessed to several persons, that he fit the description of the suspect, and that he had been present. Lionel Ray Williams was accused of second-degree murder in 1979. The subsequent trial focused less on establishing his guilt for killing Sal. Williams has already addressed that in his own admissions. More about the motivation. It was a simple robbery attempt, according to the prosecutors. The defense presented the murder as a terrible accident that happened during a criminal act, relying on the claim that Williams was unaware of Sal Mineo's identity. Williams boasted, according to testimony from jail system witnesses. Some people remembered him going into great detail about the attack, including the fact that the victim had been wearing a white shirt that evening, which was consistent with the crime scene. He surprised the courtroom with his cavalier attitude toward the murders, according to other testimonies. Williams was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder by the jury. He received a prison term ranging from 51 years to life. Although the conviction provided some closure for law enforcement, the rumors persisted. Many of Sal's admirers and acquaintances thought that the official version was lacking something important. The accuracy of the wound and the fact that nothing had been taken were incompatible with the notion of a totally random street mugging. Williams was thought by some to be a stand-in. Although there was never any proof, others believed he had been hired. Nevertheless, the judicial system had a response. Sal Mineo's passing was not the result of a Hollywood plot, a rivalry, or an act of retaliation. The court ruled that it was a senseless murder committed by a man seeking a quick profit. You would assume the story would end when a killer is apprehended, put on trial, and found guilty. However, the opposite occurred with Sal Mineo. The questions ought to have been resolved when Lionel Ray Williams was found guilty in 1979. Rather, it appeared to give the enigma a new lease on life. A portion of the issue was that many individuals were never satisfied with the official explanation. Sal had been precisely stabbed once, right in the heart. It wasn't the disorderly mayhem that most people think of when they think of a poorly executed street heist. And it didn't feel right to those who knew him that he would have retaliated against a robber. He was cautious, streetwise, and more inclined to defuse a situation than to fight back with force. There was also the matter of nothing being taken. Not his keys, his wallet, or his watch. The biggest flaw in the robbery gone wrong hypothesis, according to critics, was that one detail. Why would Williams run away without taking anything if he had really intended to rob Sal? Particularly after rendering his victim incapable. That discrepancy between the truth and people's comfort level allowed the rumors to flourish. Sal was thought to have been singled out due to his sexual orientation. Others believed it was a murder committed in retaliation against a former acquaintance. An enigmatic conspiracy has always been popular in Hollywood, and Sal's untimely demise sparked conjecture. But as time went on, further revelations emerged. Small facts from those engaged in the case have been gathered over time, rather than in the form of startling new evidence. In subsequent interviews, detectives who had worked the case were open and honest. They clarified that although the wound seemed exact, surgery was not always required. An individual skilled in street fighting could cleanly strike the heart with a powerful, lucky stab. Regarding the absence of stolen goods, authorities observed that in certain muggings, particularly when the perpetrator becomes frightened after causing significant harm, their natural reaction is to flee rather than remain and steal anything. The previously ambiguous witness statements from that evening were again re-examined in light of Williams's apprehension. Before the murder, a number of neighbors had spotted a man who fit his description hanging around the neighborhood, not exactly following Sal, but instead looking for openings. The idea that Sal was targeted as someone who happened to stroll into the wrong place at the wrong time rather than as a person was supported by that. Even Williams' purported confessions when incarcerated fit the description of a criminal who had committed an opportunistic crime and then exploited it to improve his standing with other prisoners. He made no indication that he had been hired, that he was aware of Sal's identity before to the stabbing, or that he had any personal motivation. Those involved in the investigation started talking more candidly about their opinions regarding the case by the late 1990s and early 2000s. A sad random act of street violence occurred after the jury's verdict. It wasn't the spectacular Hollywood conclusion that everyone had anticipated. It was something far colder, pointless, avoidable, and in its simplicity, terrible. Since it implied that there was nothing to discover, no mastermind to hold accountable, and no hidden conflict to expose, many people found that truth more difficult to swallow than any conspiracy idea. Sal Mineo was killed because he was in the wrong location at the wrong time, not because of who he was. And in a way, that added to the senselessness of his loss. Although Sal Mineo's life was brief, it was filled with passion. He was more than simply a teenage idol. He was a talented actor who defied Hollywood's demands. He left behind work that endures even now, decades after Plato's Rebel Without a Cause and his influential involvement in Exodus. He fought for films like P.S. and chose characters that challenged audiences, taking chances when other actors stayed safe. Your feline companion has passed away. He lost jobs and a reliable source of income as a result of that bravery, but his career feels ageless. At the conclusion, it wasn't a Hollywood thriller's plot. There was only a random act of violence that took a man who still had a lot to offer. No rival, betrayal, or scheme. That fact is the most difficult in some respects since it makes us acknowledge how fleeting life is. Over time, new viewers have come across Sal's films and saw what was popular in the 1950s. That unique combination of strength and vulnerability. Friends recall his loyalty, humor, and generosity. His tale serves as a reminder that there is a complete person behind every headline. Dreams, hardships, and victories. He might have died needlessly. However, his life was far from that. Even if the matter has been legally resolved, people who admired him will always feel the effects of it. Watch the video on your screen right now to learn about another Hollywood mystery that will alter your perception of one of its biggest actors.